to the Power Hour. I'm your host, DJ Larry Jones, and today I have a special guest joining me. Uh, she's the author of the book, You're on Fire and It's Fine, and the owner and executive director of Creative Healing. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Katie K. May. Katie, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a lot I want to talk about with the book. Now, let's start with the book. I want to jump right into this.
Yeah,
You're on Fire and It's Fine. Can you tell us about the book and what inspired you to write it?
absolutely. So the title, You're on Fire, It's Fine, it comes from this idea that people who are biologically sensitive often feel like they're on fire with their emotions. And the people in their lives who don't have that same experience are constantly telling them, you're fine, you're too sensitive, everything's okay. And so there's this experience of being on fire, but everyone around you kind of telling you you're crazy for feeling the way that you do. And so that's the foundation of the book, is for those what I call fire feelers. And the book came from a lifetime of experience of being a fire feeler, of being a troubled teen who had depression and self-harm behaviors in an invalidating environment, and then growing up to become a therapist who works with teens and the parent of a teen who has mental health struggles. And so I'm able to look at the situation from all sides as a teenager, as a parent, and as a professional who specializes in this area.
Right, right. How did you push through? How did you make it work for you?
A lot of it was using my strengths, writing. I have books and books of poetry and journals that some of what I use to include in the book. Learning, intellectualizing, and leaning on a really solid friend group. I struggled at home. I struggled to find my place at school, but ultimately I had a solid friend group that are still my best friends to this day. And that's what helped get me through and get me to this point.
Right. Now, why is it important to address these intense emotions in teenagers?
Well, so intense emotions, I think big emotions happen in almost all teenagers, but when someone is a fire feeler, they experience them as even more deep, even more intense, and it can lead to self-destructive behaviors, things like suicidal ideation, self-harm, eating disorders, substance use. So all of these other behaviors that come as a means to try and regulate or reduce the intense emotions or try and make them go away. So if we're not addressing these emotions, it's showing up in these dangerous and sometimes life-threatening behaviors.
All right. How can we get to the root cause of it, though? How can we find out what it is and get to the root cause?
I love that question, chapter one.
Okay.
So finding the root cause really comes with pausing as a parent, as an adult or support person, and trying to recognize what is the feeling that's underneath this behavior. Whatever I'm seeing on the outside, let me pause and not make judgment on the fact that you're yelling at me or lashing out or hurting yourself in some way. And let me sit with that and look at, wow, you must really be hurting if this is how this is showing up in your life. All behavior communicates a message. And so we want to use that message to understand the experience for the person that we're supporting.
Okay, right. Now, let's get to some of the common intense emotions that teens may experience. What are some of the common emotions they may feel?
Anxiety and depression are the big ones. So we see a lot of sadness, hopelessness, and anxiety avoidance. And then I would say a combination of those things, we see shame, and shame isn't easily recognized, but this idea that there's something wrong with me, I'm bad or wrong in some way, I'm defective. And again, that's this message that comes from years of having really intense experiences, but people in your life not knowing how to respond to them. So they internalize that something must be wrong with me if I'm the only one that's reacting this way and everyone else is telling me it's fine.
Now, do most teenagers recognize it themselves? And if they do, I mean, let me say this: some may not recognize that they have a problem, right?
Mhm.
Once they feel like there is a problem, what should they do about it? And not a lot of times they kind of internalize it, right?
Absolutely. I would say that almost all teenagers recognize when they're feeling sad, depressed, anxious, but they may not recognize that the behavior that comes with that is problematic for them, or they may not want to give it up because
Right.
it's helping them in some way. It does help the emotion to come down. It does help other people to understand how they're feeling. And so getting the motivation to let go of a problematic behavior is often the place where you see some of that struggle come up of like, when we find something else that fills that need, that's when we start to see that behavior go away. So when we find other ways to reduce anxiety, depression, sadness, shame, when we find other ways like words or experiences to help you share, this is how I feel and this is the support that I need, then we start to see the behaviors go down.
Okay. All right. Now, so basically, shifting their focus onto something positive or something that'll take their mind off of what they're going through. You think that'll help?
It's a little bit of both. It's understanding why it's happening and then shifting to a different kind of response. So when I'm working with clients, what we're really looking at is this very short story of what happened directly before one of these self-destructive behaviors. Were you feeling really anxious? Were you feeling rejected or left out? Were you feeling lonely? And then what happened during or after that behavior that made that feeling go down? So that's going to give us the data of what is it that this person needs. If I'm feeling really lonely and every time I'm lonely, I act out or self-harm, then we need to solve for loneliness. We need to figure out, how do we get you more connected? How do we get you expressing yourself? So it's really looking at the data of why something's happening. Again, that root cause, and then figuring out what the plan is from there. And it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Right. How can parents or guardians recognize when their teen is struggling with these emotions?
Yeah, and that's a really hard one because there's a tough line between what's typical teenage behavior and what's cause for concern, because to some extent, every teen is going to be more private, going to want to spend more time in their room, going to be a little bit sassy or irritable with their parents. So I would say if that's the case, then maybe we pause or seek a second opinion. But if you are seeing a consistent pattern of withdrawal, difficulty getting out of bed, tearfulness, self-critical statements, or something that's a pattern of at least 2 weeks and it feels unrelenting, that's when we want to seek professional support or start to look into the resources for how to support us as parents, but also our teens.
Let's talk about professional help.
Yeah.
When do we know it's time for professional help?
Okay, so my thing is, I think that if you're worried that your teen is depressed or you're worried that your teen is hurting themselves, it's probably already past the point where they are depressed or they are hurting themselves. Like if you're seeing those externalized symptoms, something is definitely up. So when is it time to seek professional help? The first time your teen mentions that they are struggling, that they might want to talk to somebody, that they're feeling sad, that's when the offer goes on the table. Because what I find is that parents will say, I was moody at your age, or every teen struggles with a little bit of low self-esteem. And that statement of invalidation causes the teen to continue to up the ante until their statement or their behavior is heard. And I used to work in a psychiatric hospital where I saw this pattern play out all the time, where parents would say, every teen is moody, it's fine, like we'll get through this. And then it got to the point where there was a really dangerous situation. And then the parent was finally like, oh yes, you need help, let's take care of this. So we start reinforcing that crisis behaviors are the solution to get your needs met. And we don't want to do that. We want to listen sooner. And so that first sign or that first request, that's when we start to explore help. And I think we should destigmatize therapy. Like therapy is definitely helpful for everyone. So let's get it in there.
I always say I think half the population needs therapy.
At least.
Now I want to get into peer pressure, right? Nowadays when you talk about depression, people look at it and say, well, just get over it. Just suck it up. It'll be all right. And now the new generation, oh, here, just have a drink or just smoke. You'll be fine. How does peer pressure play a role in today's society when it comes to depression?
I think peer pressure is always a factor, teenager, adult, whatever. We all want to be liked. We all want to belong. So I think that's just part of the human experience. And in the teenage years, when developmentally teens, it's so much more important that they have that peer group and that they're liked by their peers. Of course, peer pressure is a part of that. And when you're struggling and it seems like something is a solution, whether it be drugs or alcohol or something else, of course, it's going to be harder to say no or to resist those things. And it's just a reality. So how does this impact depression? I don't know. It's like a chicken and the egg. Like if I'm depressed, I might be more likely to smoke weed to make my depression go away. And if I'm smoking weed, I might start to become depressed. And so it's hard to tease out, which one's the chicken and which one's the egg. But I think what's really important is communication with your teenager and keeping that open line of communication. If you ever need a ride, I'll be there to pick you up. If you ever want to, if you're thinking about exploring something, let's have a conversation about the pros and cons. As a parent of a teenager myself, I'm very realistic about typical teen exploration and the kinds of things that teenagers are curious about. And so let's have a real conversation about what's the impact of drinking alcohol when you're on psychiatric medications? What's the impact of getting in a car with someone if they've, smoked that night or whatever? Let's just talk about these things and make it so it's not scary to talk about them in case you need help and you need to talk about them one day.
Exactly. Now, kids, 9 times out of 10, well, some kids do and some kids don't talk to us as parents.
Yeah.
How do we get them to open up? Because they're not going to just open up and say, well, some do, though. Don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. Mom, Dad, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that way. How do we get more involved in their social life?
It's a both and. So I have a very good relationship with my teenager, and they're also very private and don't share everything with me. And that's normal. That's developmentally typical. So I like to, instead of ask questions, I like to model information. For example, if you're going through a hard experience, let's say a loss, let's say your family experienced a loss and your teen is very closed up, they're not talking about anything, you're worried about what they're thinking about. Self-disclosing to them can be just as helpful. Something like, right now I'm feeling really sad, but I'm also feeling really guilty because I didn't answer that person's last text, and that's sitting with me and I'm feeling really heavy. And then pause and watch your teen and notice if they nod or if their eyes kind of register like, yes, that's true for me too. So you want to be able to model authentic, direct disclosures with your teenager and allow them to choose what to say or not to say. But that's just as important as trying to get information from them.
Yeah. Now, as they get older, what age do we start giving them a little more independence?
Naturally, that happens at 16 when they start driving. And so we need to have those conversations about what that looks like. And I think it happens again when they're 18, when they've graduated high school, when, whatever that next step is, they're legally an adult. And so I think there are these natural periods when we see teenagers start to grow and change. And then we as parents need to adapt to that, whether it's managing our own anxieties about them being out in the world without us being able to control them, or dealing with the grief of them not needing us as much. I think it's just a natural progression and we can't stop it or control it. So we need to get ready for it and regulate ourselves as parents as it's happening.
Right, because we tend to want to hold on to them and,
yes, we do.
and look at them as they're still babies, when they're actually growing into full-blown adults. Now, keeping their friends close, how do you think about that? You keep their friends close to your home so you can monitor who they're with and what they're doing? How do you control that?
I don't think you can control it. I mean, do you remember being 16? Because I do. And I remember being able to say something.
And it's funny because, what we've done when we came up, I look at it and I'm like, wow, if they do what I did, right? Oh my gosh, how can I stop it? You can't stop it. We can't
stop it.
Yeah.
I think you can just be honest about it. And I got in a lot of trouble as a teenager and a young adult. And I'm honest to a point with my teen about what some of those things looked like, because I don't want them to repeat my same mistakes. And so I think it's being honest, it's sharing concerns. I'm worried about you staying out past 2 a.m. because nothing good happens out past 2 a.m. So let's figure out how you're going to keep yourself safe if this happens, or how you would handle this situation. If we can scaffold those behaviors and situations and reactions with our teen and not and trust that they're gonna respond in the way that we've talked about with them, that's the best that we can do. And I really look at our role as parents as being able to raise fulfilled, independent adults. And we don't do that by controlling. If you're controlling, they're just doing it to follow the rules or not get in trouble. And then what does that look like when they're an adult? So that's not my job, is to control, it's to teach and trust.
Right. I've seen some situations where a parent gives a kid too much leeway, and that's it's not good. But if you keep a tight hold on them, that's not good. So you have to find that middle ground. Now, what does the conversation sound like when you open a dialogue about relationships, drugs, alcohol? What does that dialogue sound like?
Yeah, I love the idea of a middle ground. I think when we go to any extreme, it's never helpful. The conversation about drugs, about alcohol, about any of the exploration or experimentation that they may do is just, here are the risks. Here's the reasons I understand that you want to try it. Here are all the things that could happen. And how are we going to plan for that so that you stay safe? And if it doesn't go well, how are you going to feel safe coming to me so that we can problem solve and I can support you? You have to have a good relationship with your teen for these things to go well, because I'll have parents say like, yeah, that works for you, great, but that'll never work for me. Well, you're probably right if right now you can't even be in a room with your teenager without getting in a big blow up argument. So it's baby steps. I talk about the hierarchy of connection. It's taking it one step at a time. You need to be able to be in the same room with your teenager without arguing or tension before you can then connect with them on a deeper level, before you can have these conversations. So taking it one step at a time. We can't go 0 to 60 or it's going to fall flat.
Right. How should we handle conflict with teens? When you have a rowdy teen who just doesn't want to listen, how should we approach that?
Okay, so you want to regulate yourself first. If you notice that your blood is boiling, if you're about to yell, if you're about to threaten and take their phone away, don't do anything. Step away, take a walk with the dog, take a shower, take a drive, whatever, but do not respond when you are in a place of escalation. When you're like 5 or below on a parental stress meter, then you can return and have the conversation with them. And you want to make sure they're regulated as well. So again, you can't control your teenager, but you can control the conditions in which the two of you have conversations. So you can say, you know what, we're both really agitated right now. I know I need to take a break and calm down a little bit before I can talk to you and really problem solve. So I'm going to step away. I'll check in with you in a couple hours and see if you feel ready to have that conversation. If not, we'll have it tomorrow. So you're not letting it go, but you're having it. You can't teach someone to swim when they're drowning. And if you're both drowning, you're not going to be able to get to shore. So you want to make sure that you're both calm, collected, regulated, and then return to the conversation or make a plan for the time that you will return to it.
I love it. I love it. Now, everyone in life, adults, teens, and we all have passions and interests. How do we find out what their passion or interest is in life to keep them away from, the negativity that's out there? Once we, lock into their passion, how should we support it and push them to go follow it, that dream?
I love this question. I like to say that where we spend our time is what's important to us. I know for me, when I look at my calendar, it's a reflection of my values and my passions and what's important to me. And the same is true for teenagers. If you notice them spending a lot of time drawing or outside practicing their pitch for baseball, or even watching YouTube videos about, top music charts or something like that, you're starting to get a sense of what's interesting to them and what's important to them. And then from there, being able to offer opportunities. Hey, there's a music camp this summer. Are you interested in going to that? Or are you joining the travel team this year? It's offering opportunities and doing what you can as a parent to cheerlead them, to support them, to give them rides, to troubleshoot or practice with them if they need support. So time and attention, both what they're doing and what you can do for them, is a great way to build passion.
All right. Now, what advice would you give someone dealing with a teenager who is struggling with social and anxiety issues? What advice would you give them?
Social anxiety is a tough one. And what happens is when you're experiencing social anxiety, the natural urge is to avoid, because that feels better. When this is really scary and I avoid it, then I feel better and the anxiety goes down. But when that happens, we never give our brain the opportunity to learn that being socially imperfect, being in a social situation, even though you're anxious, actually isn't dangerous. And when we can be in that situation and learn that, the anxiety starts to go down because we're teaching our brain that it's not a threat like our brain currently thinks that it is. So if you have a teen who's socially anxious, it's providing moments of being around people, socialization, small bites at a time, dipping your toe in the water before you go in a little deeper. So maybe it's a club, maybe it's a more structured event. And then eventually, supporting them in going to a party and staying for an hour, even if it feels scary for them, giving them an out to come home. But I would say don't enable or accommodate your teen who wants to avoid everything if they're feeling anxious. Definitely work with a professional on the progression to get them back to socialization, because it can feel really difficult to do on your own if you don't have a structured plan and support with that one.
All right. It was a pleasure having you on the show. We're running out of time. Katie K. May, the name of the book is You're on Fire, It's Fine. There's the book. How can they get the book if they want to get their hands on it and read it?
Yeah, it's available Kindle, Audible, and paperback and hardback on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and major booksellers.
There you go. You're watching the Power Hour right here on Soul TV. That was Katie K. May.